Welcome to Real Estate in the Digital Age, or the REDA Podcast. Real estate entrepreneurs Ryan Poole and Ryan Beckett bring you new content every week, reporting on market trends, industry innovations, cutting-edge real estate technology, and perspectives from the field. The future of real estate is here. Are you ready?
All right, welcome everybody to the REDA Podcast. We have an exciting episode here because, we've got to know a lot of different people in the real estate industry throughout this podcast, but, some of the listeners and some of the watchers have asked, hey, we haven't got to know you guys yet on a personal level and what you're doing. I'm very excited today, Ryan, because we're actually doing the episode on you and BitRealty.
It's fantastic. It's a great idea. I didn't even think about it, so we appreciate the feedback as always. Might get a little shy. I'm not used to the attention being on me, but I'm excited to talk a little bit about BitRealty and all the things going on.
I am too, Ryan, because, one reason, I love BitRealty, obviously my license with BitRealty is you are a very forward-thinking, tech-forward brokerage. Mm-hmm. This is the REDA Podcast, the real estate in the digital age. So it's good. We're going to do a deep dive. People are going to get to know you. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, for the listeners that are out there, they might not know your background, Ryan. Mm-hmm. What's your background? Where are you from? How did you get into the real estate business? Why don't you share with the listeners?
So, believe it or not, I'm from a little place called Huntington, West Virginia, in the Rust Belt. Wow. I was born there. My family moved down to South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, when I was about 3 years old, and then we soon thereafter moved to Boca. So I grew up in Boca my whole life. Grew up playing sports. I was that nerdy jock. I would go from baseball practice to a lacrosse game at the same day. Yep. And God bless my parents. And I think I learned a lot about sales and life from sports and team sports. Yeah. And that was a big part of my life, has a lot of fingerprints on my personality today. And I still think I'm kind of a middle of the country, kind of good old boy deep down. So I just love South Florida. My younger brother was born here, but as you know, I'm pretty close to as native as it gets down here.
Yeah, no, I love Florida. Have you ever had a feeling that you wanted to travel anywhere else? Have you been pretty satisfied living here in South Florida?
Yeah, I love it here. I joke with my parents. I was like, man, in my humble opinion, I think we live in one of the nicest places on earth. Sure, the summer can get a little humid. We have the cone of uncertainty with hurricanes, but my whole family's down here. In the winter, you won't find better weather. We have the no state income tax, and I love it. I've lived in a couple other places outside of the country, and one of the best things that I found from travel is it makes you appreciate home. Yeah, I love traveling. I have some favorite cities that are outside of the United States, but when you go through customs and they're like, welcome home. I just one of my favorite things. And I'm obsessed with California. I love California. It's like it's like living in air conditioning year round. I love the Southern California vibe, but South Florida is what I chose to make my home and hopefully eventually raise a family, and where I decided to launch my business and to continue to grow it from here.
No, you have some great hobbies. I mean, why don't you tell the listeners, about this big project that you're doing with your sailboat?
Yeah, so I have an old sailboat. You'll learn on the podcast as we talk a little bit about me that I'm a masochist, and I thought I would like sailing, so I took some sailing lessons about 10 years ago at a local sailing club, and I found a vintage sailboat that was designed for racing. So I went to New York, and they said it was going to be about $5,000 to put it on a trailer and bring it down. I was like, man, I'd rather spend that on gas and beer. and my business at the time was very seasonal because I cut my teeth on equestrian real estate out in Wellington, a suburb of Palm Beach, for those that aren't familiar. And so the summers were pretty open, and the winters I worked 8 days a week and twice on Sunday. Mm-hmm. So I went up and got it. It was a comedy of errors. I can share with you over a beer some of the self-deprecating stories. But right now, I'm taking the gas engine out. I've been following this company for a long time. And like a lot of things, like in the car market, the price has come down significantly. The range has extended significantly. So from this podcast, from this recording, I'm actually going to do some sanding and prep work, and we're going to be dropping an electric engine in this weekend.
So from real estate to doing boat work, that's quite a big difference there.
You got to have thick skin for both.
You do. Which leads us into, Ryan, I mean, how did you get into the real estate industry, and why did you get into it? Why did you choose, I mean, obviously you're well educated, grew up here in South Florida, your family had a lot of business. Why did you get into real estate, and what was your passion for getting into it?
So it's a great question. I didn't grow up candidly telling my parents I wanted to sell condos or, get involved in horse farms even. I wanted to be a garbage man when I was younger because I loved that they got to ride on the back of the truck.
My son does too, yes.
Wanted to be a Top Gun pilot after seeing Top Gun as a kid. And how I got into real estate is I played lacrosse at Florida State, and I double majored in finance and real estate. It's a double major 4-year degree. And with a 4-year degree in real estate, you can pretty much in all of the 50 states, as I understand it, you can sit for your test right away. You don't have to do any pre-licensing. So that's how I was able to get my license in California and New York. I still have to take the test, but it's expedited. And my idea throughout college when I was matriculating through my coursework was that I was going to do commercial real estate.
Gotcha.
And New York City always had a special place in my heart. So I thought, I was blind with ambition at the time. I was like, I'm going to move to New York City. I'm going to do commercial real estate in Manhattan, and that's what I'm going to do. Well, my lacrosse coach was a wealthy, semi-retired real estate developer, and he played goalie for Maryland. And my last 2 years, I was captain of the team, and when all the guys were drinking beers in the back of the bus, I took it as an opportunity. I was picking his brain.
Wow.
All the time. And him and I had a great relationship, being the captain of his team that he was coaching, and I learned a ton from him. So when I graduated college, I had that normal path. Remember, to give you and the audience context, this was before the recession.
Yeah.
This is 2005-ish, and when I got out of school, the real estate market was red hot.
Yes.
Retrospectively, too hot.
Yeah.
And his company was involved in a project in Wellington, and he was hiring Palm Beach Polo Realty to do the sales. And I had done an internship for him because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to go to law school. If I was being honest with myself, I was probably going to go to law school just to get more education and delay making a decision because I hadn't figured it out what I wanted to do. My mom was trying to push me into that direction because she's a mom and it was safe. It's safe to be a doctor or a lawyer in a lot of moms' eyes. Being an entrepreneur and a realtor where I didn't have a draw, I didn't have a salary, that's not exciting for a lot of moms coming out of school because they're probably worried that you're going to have to move back into the house at some point.
Yeah, pay your college debt.
Exactly. So I was like, Wellington? I grew up in Boca Raton. We were out on the water every day. I used to make fun of some of my friends that I went to high school that lived in horse country Wellington. And my lacrosse coach says, Ryan, I'm not telling you what to do, but the broker here, Don Langdon, I think I've brought him up. He was my mentor. He's now the broker of Douglas Elliman Palm Beach. He goes, I know a lot of brokers and sales director in the business. Don Langdon can train you better than anyone I know.
Wow.
And if you make less than he gave me a certain amount, he said, they'll fire you because you suck at sales. This office doesn't hire. It's a great opportunity. And I'm not telling you what to do, Ryan, but if I were you, I'd be here 15 minutes before the office opens tomorrow with a Starbucks waiting for Don and learn everything you can. It's like, all right, coach. I still looked up to him like a coach. So I showed up the next day, 20 minutes early, had a Starbucks, and the rest is history. I was making way more money than a 23-year-old, 24-year-old should probably make, and I had a lot of hubris, maybe a little cockiness and ignorance in there. And I remember joking with my parents. I was like, I don't know what you guys were talking about. This real life thing's easy. I was like maxing out.
People will let the listeners know you're working on site for a developer, so you had people walking.
That's right.
That were interested.
And that was a market that when I had to walk into my office, if they didn't want to buy the condo, I was like, all right, prices are going up next week, and the person behind you will. And I was selling 2 condos a day.
That's
for a while, right?
Yeah.
And that led us into the Great Recession, right? And the bottom fell out.
Yeah.
And I only ate what I killed, so to speak, and I was working my tail off. And I went from making a lot of money to still a decent annual, I would say, income, but dramatically less. And I thought some of the purchases, I got into my first home.
Yeah.
I got into my first car because I needed a nice car to drive clients around. I had contributed significantly to my retirement, so I didn't keep a lot in my liquid checking account.
Yep.
And after, a year and a half of my condo association that I owned was starting to assess me to make up for the gaps in the foreclosures that were in my HOA.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, this is going to get a little tight.
Yeah.
And then I had to touch my retirement and take the penalties and to make sure that I stayed in line, because I didn't really have a lot of runway to build that up.
Yeah.
And I think that was good for me, because I didn't have kids in private school. I didn't have a lot of debt. And it's like being on the poker table and playing, with not a lot of chips on the table, And I had to go a little backwards, but I bring that story up because it humbled me.
Yeah.
And it made me a little bit more conservative. Like if you had a grandfather, a great-grandfather that went through depression, that only paid everything cash, and he put his money under the mattress or only invested in treasury bills. I got really conservative about debt, and I don't like to do a lot of fixed costs because I like to be able to get financially small. So I learned a ton. Outside of the financial part and how it humbled me, learned a ton working with a very interesting demographic in the horse world. It's kind of a blue blood, old money group, animal lovers, international group, but it becomes a small world very quickly.
So for the audience, let you know, so you work on site developing, selling new construction, and then you went to selling general real estate.
That's right.
With
Palm Beach Polo. So I was on site. So the best way to convey it is, even though I was on site developer sales selling condos in Wellington, I'd say 80% of my buyers were equestrians.
Wow.
Right? Because that's just, it's like a hotbed of, but then we had a lot of investors, obviously, at the time too. So that's how I got into it. And then I looked at the numbers, the list prices for horse farms, and they were 5X.
Yeah.
5X. And what I started to learn with real estate, I was like, man, these higher priced properties, they're not really more work. In fact, I was putting more work into little rentals than I was some of these bigger sales. I would educate the buyer. I would help facilitate the sale. I would do anything I could to service my client. And then I handed it off to the attorneys, and they did the closing. And I was like, so I started getting into horse farms at a young age.
Yep.
And most of the realtors I was competing against grew up in horses, right? And their natural progression, once they graduated college and the parents were like, hey, we're not going to pay for these horses anymore, they knew Wellington, they knew horses, they knew the equestrian industry, and it was a natural transition into real estate, equestrian real estate. So for me, I make this analogy. It's like, imagine going to Aspen and selling ski and ski outs, but not skiing.
Yeah.
You lose a little credibility. So I started riding because I had a couple clients and friends by osmosis that were big trainers, very fortunate. And you don't need to be an Olympic rider, just like in Aspen with the skiing analogy. You got to know where the green trail matches up with the blue trail and how to get to that lift and why that ski and ski out is valued a little bit more, a little bit less than the other. So I got to a level of understanding the different kinds of footing in the ring, a hot walker, turnout, hacking distance, which means like how close it is for someone to hop on their horse and ride to the horse show. So it really dialed my level of professionalism, and I had sharp elbows because it is really.
Well, it is, because you started there from zero, pretty much.
Zero.
Right? And then you've built an incredible name in Wellington, and you were definitely in the top 3 to 5 agents in that whole area.
Yeah, I reached kind of the top of the mountain. I was kind of top 5. Like, if you were going to buy a horse farm, I was one of 5 realtors, I think you would call, for a while. And I like achieving goals, probably to a fault. So I felt like when I got to the top of the mountain, when I came out of the recession, was doing really well, was enjoying it. And I was like, all right, what's next? Like, how am I going to grow? Like, I'm only as good as my next sale.
Yeah.
I'd like to take the next step.
And what was the next step, Ryan? What was it?
So me and 2 people I worked with at that firm at Palm Beach Polo, we saw somewhat of a consolidation. It was mom and pop brokerages, no big brands.
A lot of boutique stuff.
A lot of boutiques. And we looked at Sotheby's because we felt that their brand fell very well inside of that old money, blue blood, equestrian demographic. So long story short, we went through a franchise application process, which was challenging. Long story short, we got it awarded. So the three of us started with the three of us, and we scaled it to 25 agents.
Wow. So it was the name of the brokerage?
Equestrian Sotheby's. Yeah, so that was our tag for our franchise.
Such a great name, by the way.
It was a great name. Yeah, it was a great name. And it was a great learning experience. I was a minority owner. One of my partners owned more than me and my other partner. So it was just enough for me at that age, I think, where, he was older, a lot more business savvy, reeled in some of the spending and certain things that I wanted to do marketing wise. And it was a great balance. And I learned a ton. I had a great experience. But then I reached the top of the mountain, which is kind of a reoccurring theme in my mind. And I decided that I wanted to open another one in Ocala, Equestrian Sotheby's. My business partners were a little bit more risk averse, which I understood. So for that reason and a few others, I decided to be like, all right, I want to go to the next thing. I keep on growing, and improving.
Of course. It's a great attribute to have, Ryan. By the way.
So that was about 5-6 years ago. So I started BitRealty. I never really had the intention of growing a firm. I just needed something to run my own deals.
Another mountain.
Another
mountain.
I thought maybe when I got done with school, because I was getting my MBA at the time here at Palm Beach Atlantic in West Palm Beach, I was like, all right, maybe I'll bring some people on. And then I just started having friends that knew me from the business that weren't happy at whatever brands they were at. They weren't happy with fees and asked me if they could just hang their license with me. I was like, sure. We'll work out an easy deal, good split, no fees. I don't make you buy a magazine. I don't do a processing fee or anything like that. I'm here for you. We only have 10 of us or 5 of us at the time. And it was a good formula. And that was like 6 years ago, which kind of led me to where we are today.
So let's back up. How the name BitRealty? Why don't you let the listeners know, how did you come up with that name? I love it. Like, what was the impetus?
So it's a great question. So at Sotheby's, I love the brand, and I thought it fit very well. But when I try to do some creative stuff, and I love to be creative with business strategy and marketing, sometimes it didn't fit within the brand, according to the brand. So I wanted something a little bit more forward thinking, so to speak, and I love tech. I was always talking to my sales director on how we can put flat screens in the office so we can present listings, and how we should redesign the website and all these other things. So now that the audience knows the equestrian context, when I came up with BitRealty, my horse friends thought it meant something related to the horse bit.
The horse bit, yeah.
And then, crypto started in 2009, and so there was a swell starting of crypto lovers. So, and I was investing a little bit in Bitcoin at the time, and people are like, oh, you did it because of Bitcoin. I was like, no, that's not true either. And I go, the reason I did it is you're all familiar with a company called Fitbit.
Yes.
Bit is just binary codes, the zeros and ones that is in computer code. And so I said, Fitbit means fitness technology. That's why they branded that company that. Even Bitcoin means technology currency. So I was like, BitRealty, that means technology real estate.
I love it, yeah.
And as tech in general, as an industry is growing, it's like, God, that's cool. Someone's got to have it. So I looked it up. No one had it.
No one had BitRealty.com.
No one had BitRealty.com. So I called my trademark attorney. I asked him if they thought it was probable that I got it, and he advised me on ways to increase the odds and said he thought he could get it. So I started retaining him to get a trademark, intellectual property protection, and then someone owned BitRealty.com.
Oh, okay.
And I was being careful with my money, and he had it parked, and he wanted certain amount of money for it. And it wasn't a ton of money, but it wasn't a little bit of money for me at the time either. So I was like, gosh, I don't want .biz. I don't want .org.
Yeah.
Because like .com is oceanfront real estate of URLs, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm going to eventually make a go of this, I should buck up. And I equated it to like one townhouse sale commission for what I had to pay for the URL. So I did that. I got trademark protection in the United States. I eventually got it in Canada, UK, and EU, just in case I decide to scale further. So technology, real estate, it's part of the brand. We're getting ready to launch a new website, redid the logo, because I'm trying to make sure that I educate the public on why it's branded that way.
No, definitely the education is great. I mean, technology real estate. It's very forward thinking, which this is the REDA podcast,
Yeah.
Ryan, real estate in the digital age. How does BitRealty leverage technology now for you and your agents?
So I'm always looking for ways to leverage tech. And I would say candidly, I think sometimes I do it too much. I think I've brought that up on the podcast before. Because when you have a tech and you get a mindset, I think that you start to get in an echo chamber and you have a hammer and everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
And you try to do it. I'm like, oh, there's got to be an app for that. Or there's got to be whatever. And what I learned from my friends that are my agents is sometimes it's too much, you know, and sometimes tech's not always a good fit. So I've experimented with a lot of different CRMs, which we've talked about. I acquired and became a customer of a big platform, Sync. I think I've told you about. It's probably more expensive than a brand my size should be using, and it's probably got a lot more horsepower than the firm my size should be using. But I wanted to grow into it.
Yeah.
So we use that, and I just started using artificial intelligence for lead gen conversations. So when we have a lead, the warming up until I actually, or one of the agents can get to them, has artificial intelligence, which in a very short period of time has worked famously.
Let's let the listeners know what a CRM is, because, you know, they might not understand it, some of them, right? I mean, I've actually been in real estate. I've used them, you know, for years. But what is a CRM, you know, for agents out there or people that might not understand what it is?
So it's customer relationship management, and I was ignorant to it because I did high price points, low volume. So as embarrassed as I am to admit it, I never even had an Excel spreadsheet, right? It was less transactional and very relationship driven, word of mouth, and you know, I'd go to my clients' weddings. I was involved with what their kids were doing, and it took a lot of energy, but it wasn't a ton of relationships. It was just, you know, high value type relationships. So when I started to discover CRMs, that was the kind of tech that I'm like, it isn't an overkill. I was like, I have done well in my career, but once I started learning with the power of CRM, I was like, gosh, how much more could I have earned, and how much easier could this have made my life, from drip campaigns to reaching out to a customer for, you know, a happy holiday, to giving them updates that they value, on the market, the value of their home. And so I played with a lot. That's the one I found. I'm enjoying it. The feedback from the agents is they enjoy it a lot. They hang their hat on lead gen. I have a couple websites, one of which is a lead gen search home valuation site called thefloridahomeguide.com. And people can go on there, they can get a value of their home, they can search for properties, and that's how I end up matching people that need help finding real estate or selling real estate with an agent in our office that is appropriate, from the area they're specialized in to the kind of products that they're familiar with and experts in.
Which is amazing, too. And another technology that you've leveraged very well and have a great is social media.
Social media,
Talk about that.
So I was on a self-deprecating. I was on a TV show called The Bachelorette, and as a result, my joke is even ABC couldn't find me a wife.
I love that one.
But I got a bump up in my social media following. I only made it halfway through the season, so it wasn't anything crazy. But it was significant, and I started, and then I got verified on the social media channels, and I started to see some of the power, not just for, you know, me, I was in my late 20s, not just for dating and those kind of superficial things, but for business.
Yes.
If I wanted to connect with someone, you know, and I had the verified check or comment, like, it opened just a little bit more doors for me. I was like, man, the power of this is amazing. And then I'd go into the gym in the morning, and on the way in, I had something I couldn't find on MLS. Something very specific. Like, I needed this kind of horse farm to rent for season with this many stalls, this many minutes from the horse show. And I'd come out of the gym an hour later, because I have a lot of equestrian friends and realtor friends, I'd have like 18 comments.
Love it.
Probably 10 of which were actually actionable and valuable to me. And I was like, this is either lazy or really smart, you know?
Exactly.
And
crowdsourcing knowledge.
right. And that's one of the things I told you I was really excited about real trade. It's the power, social media can be used for nefarious things.
I know.
Bullying can make people insecure and have body
cat memes.
Yeah, cat memes. Well, I actually like some of the cat memes. But it's like a lot of things when leveraged and used the right way, whether it's raising money for a charity or helping family connect. And as we're talking about business, man, it's powerful. So I've tried to grow BitRealty's social presence. I've 10x'd our following in the last 6 months.
Awesome, Ryan.
I'm working on getting it verified because, real estate companies are very brand heavy. Very brand heavy. The real estate business, the brokerage business isn't something where you have a impressive balance sheet. And what I mean by that, you don't have a lot of assets. Most real estate companies don't own their real estate.
Yep.
They don't have heavy equipment. They don't have inventory.
They don't own their tech.
They don't own their tech. So they're really just like, I kind of got critical of myself of only being as good as my next sale.
Yeah.
Right? I was like, all right, well, if a bunch of these realtors leave or because a new brand comes in town or whatever, they don't really have an except for their future cash flows.
Yep.
Right? So yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting where everything is going, but the social media I think is huge. I think it's important. I think it's important for the brand. Whether one of my agents are going to a listing appointment or I eventually go on to franchise the company selling a franchise, you need something that is good both consumer facing, agent facing,
Yes.
To have good brand equity. And it's tough to build good brand equity. And it's a little bit of a hockey stick. It's slow, slow, and then you go.
Yeah.
So but I love challenges.
Yeah, I know you do it, and it's great. It's been fun, watching BitRealty grow, and just like all the other listeners, like Keller Williams just didn't start overnight, or Douglas Elliman. I mean, it took years and years for them to build those brands. So it takes time and energy and effort.
Gary Keller, I've read a lot of his books. I really respect him. I think he's a visionary.
Yep.
I think he's a great coach. I think he's a great leader. And the ball kind of rolled back down the hill a few times for him. I think if I remember the part that I read in one of his books, he was in Texas, and I think he grew when he was a private company to like 4 offices. But then he got spread a little too thin.
Yep.
And he was kind of the secret sauce, and it backslided. And I don't remember if he had to mortgage his house, kind of like Ray Kroc, but I think there were some tough moments there for him. And then he decided to franchise, and the rest is history.
Yep.
It's interesting. The other bit of tech that we use, even though I don't want people to think of BitRealty as Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, I wanted to think of technology and real estate. We work with a company called BitPay, which is obviously pretty good co-branding, and they're basically the PayPal of crypto. They support, I believe, up to 15 different cryptos. And what they do is, I understand it, like a lot of, whether it's Coinbase or Gemini or Binance, you have a lot of money in Bitcoin, let's say.
Yeah.
Say you were an early investor, and even where the price is today, you had a lot of money. Well, it's a very volatile asset. So like Vegas, where it's risky, some people take their winnings off the table, and then they're just playing with house money. And if you have, say you have $5 million in Bitcoin, for example, and you want to buy a house for $1 million for your family, what better place to take some money off the table than to put it in real estate? What BitPay allows me to do is, in escrow, I can go in and say, hey, I have this listing for $5 million, and my seller could have animosity to crypto. And what BitPay will do will take their position and put it into USD, convert it, whatever that exchange rate. They charge a commission on the deal, but they take the volatility risk, and I think they'll go up to 12 to 15 million in one day of conversion. So that allows me for SEO, advertising, differentiating myself. I advertise in crypto and MLS a few years ago, and I can tell you, I like them, but they're not usually ahead of the curve on tech. They added cryptocurrency. When you input a listing, right next to cash, conventional, financing, VA, they had cryptocurrency. It's like, wow. So I try to look down the future and say, hey, how can I leverage this? So I tell my sellers, even if they don't like crypto, it's like, it sounds a lot sexier than it is. It's just like if I had a client from Europe and he had euros, he just has to convert it to USD. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So it helps me maybe tap into a little bit wider of a demographic pool because I kind of stand out. I've actually consulted on some deals on the island and in South Florida where a realtor I was friends with had an offer in crypto.
This is great.
Didn't know what to do.
I mean, that's which
And
leads us, which me too, Ryan. Obviously, I love the technology too as well. And let's talk about that since we're on this vein. Is your doctorate and your dissertation, Ryan? This is very exciting. So you're actually the only broker that I know that's getting their doctorate in real estate. It's very impressive, Ryan.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Like one of my professors said on the first day of school, when we were all, my classmates in my cohort, all excited, we got into this program. It's in Rollins College in Winter Park, which has a very well-respected small business school. And one of our professors goes, yeah, you guys will all be doctors. You just won't be able to help anyone.
I don't know about that. Real estate, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to generate wealth. We've said it earlier in earlier podcasts, but 75% of U.S. millionaires have made in real estate. And obviously, when you're wealthy, you're healthy, you have money for great health care, so you can make a big impact. But so that's amazing, Ryan. So the big finishing here is your dissertation. Why don't you have the listeners talk a little bit about what your dissertation's about?
Yeah, so what led me into the dissertation was a couple things. The whole program in and of itself, everyone, and a lot of my friends, including my mom, they're like, why are you going back to school? Like, you're self-employed. Mm-hmm. It's not like you're going to get a raise. It's going to cost a ton of money. You're going to spend a lot of time focused on that. And I was like, well, anytime I've taken myself out of my comfort zone, that's when I feel I've grown the most, whether it was some crazy triathlon or ultra run.
You've done some amazing things.
Yeah, thanks, man. Crazy. And the reason I tap into those things is, A, it's fun. Mm-hmm. B, it's great to do with friends. And C, is that growing out of your comfort zone. And education is something that no one can ever take away from you.
It's great. It's a wealth builder, right? Because you're investing in yourself and education. It helps you in so many ways.
And one of the last things that I really pushed me into the program is I have a couple friends that went to law school and studied for the bar, passed it, but never actually practiced law. They went into business or politics, and I've asked them in separate conversations, do you regret going to law school? You haven't practiced a day of law in your life.
Yeah.
And their answers are usually pretty similar. And they said, I don't, because it totally rewired how I think, how I approach a contract, how I negotiate, how I listen and read news stories. Yeah. And that meant a lot to me. And I got that out of the program because the first 2 years, it's a doctorate in business administration, not a PhD. PhDs are designed for people that want to typically stay in academia, research, and or teach. A DBA was designed for people that want to stay in the private sector. So I liked the idea of that. Yeah. And I thought that going through this program separate from a PhD, I could actually do things that were relevant to my career, my industry. So I say all that to say, which led me into my dissertation. And the recommendation from the professors is the best dissertation is a finished dissertation. They're like, don't do something you're interested in. Don't try to solve all the world's problems. Do something where the data's there. Yes. You can grab it, and then you can spit it out, and you can graduate, and you can stop paying us. I was like, but I'm a masochist. So I didn't want to research for my career, my life afterwards. So I wanted to get a lot out of the time, even if it took me a couple extra semesters to do. So I decided to do a case study, and I have to give you credit. I think I've told you this before. I was helping with Real Trade in the early days, and you were big on blockchain, tokenization of assets, and it was kind of that matrix blue or red pill.
Yes.
And then I started watching some TED Talks on it. Then I started talking to some friends that I knew were playing around with it. And then I started talking to you more about it. Then we started going to some conference about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got the bug.
Yep.
And people that were way smarter than me were extremely excited about it. And I just tried to like listen and absorb everything I could. So that's why I decided to do my dissertation, which is on the fractionalized ownership of real estate. We've talked about this on a podcast. And it's not about the technology. It's not about it as a financial instrument or its returns historically. What it is about the adoption of it. And the reason I decided to use that theoretical framework in my research, I was like, man, if I learn that theory, this will be super interesting because I'm interested on what creates adoption for BitRealty, what creates adoption for real trade, what creates adoption for something else I want to do in life or invest in. And so I love that idea of the theoretical framework of adoption. And then I also loved that it's real estate and it's fractionalized ownership, and I believe it to be the future. So I was like, man, if I'm going to spend a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and money on this, then I'm going to try to get, as a business person should think, what's my return on this? And I was like, I could turn this into a book. I could use it for my own investing in terms of where I think this is in terms of its evolution and a nascent.
Which you have invested in.
I have, yeah. Yes. So I invest with Red Swan and a company called Realty, letter T. And they have different investment strategies. I did some small investments because A, I wanted to learn as part of my dissertation, and B, it's a great investment. You know?
Amazing.
And so just did my first in, which I interviewed you. Thank you very much. And then I'll do my analysis, conclusion, and defense. So I hope to graduate this semester.
That's awesome. Congratulations, Ryan.
Thank you.
I mean, it is. Like I said, I don't know any other brokers out there that have that.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's great. So let's go back. We've covered a bunch of real estate stuff, Ryan. It's amazing. Let's talk a little bit more too, because the listeners love you. You have so many amazing things that you've done, your hobbies. I mean, you're one of the only people that I know in my whole friend network that's actually scaled mountains, and not just any mountain.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell a little bit about listeners about that?
So, life is funny, and my uncle is an immigration attorney, and he was going to FIU. He was dating a girl from Nepal, and she was getting ready, after they graduated, she was going to be sent back to Nepal. And they were in a very serious relationship and love, and they decided to get married. So my uncle married them in the backyard of my grandparents' house. Wow. And I started to get to know my new aunt better. And this is probably 7th, 8th grade. I learned that her dad was the first person to ever climb the summit of Mount Everest. He did it with Sir Edmund Hillary.
He was the Sherpa.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like I have to go. But the only 2 times you can go to Everest are in the fall around October or in the spring, May, because you have monsoon season in the summer and you have winter, obviously bad. So you have to do it in those 2 transitionary windows. So I always had sports, I always had school. So October-ish and May-ish just never worked for me. And so when I graduated undergrad, I asked a couple friends if they would be interested. And, I'll go back to what I said about the comfort zone. I want to bump up against my comfort zone. I read this book, Comfort Crisis, which I highly recommend to the audience. I heard him on a couple of the very popular podcasts, maybe Joe Rogan and a couple of the others. And I was like, wow, I got to read this book. I love his theory. And one of the things he says is it should scare you. Mm-hmm. You should have doubt when you sign up for it that you might not be able to complete it. But the other side of the bookend is there shouldn't be a significant risk of bodily injury or death. So I decided that I wasn't going to summit because it was $100,000 and I had to block off like 3 or 4 months of my life, and I kind of value my fingers and toes.
You see those photos with their fingers.
Yeah, so I booked the trip, and then while we were there in Kathmandu getting ready, my aunt's brother, so another son of Tenzing Norgay, was like, hey, I think you should summit a sister peak. And I have a mountain that's not too far away from Everest Base Camp, but we have to buy the permit while we're here in Kathmandu. It's like, okay, sounds great. So we trekked up to Everest Base Camp. Let me tell you.
So what's Everest Base Camp? I mean, it's very high.
Everest Base Camp, I believe, is about 18,000 feet and change, maybe a little bit. And it's just a long trek. You know, there's nothing extremely technical about getting there. I think it's like a week and a half. It gets a little scary because helicopters can't really fly that high. They lose traction in their rotors, and with altitude sickness, that can lead into something called pulmonary edema, which you start getting fluid in your lungs. And the only way you're getting out of there is walking or being carried out. And you have to descend as quickly as possible if you start to get that. So if I was asked if I wanted to summit a sister peak at base camp, I would have said, heck no, because I was banged up. You know, the altitude is starting to get to me. Steps become more difficult, everything. So, but I had already paid for the permit, and I was with my buddies, so we went over and we summited a sister peak called Island Peak, which is 21,500.
So you've been over 20,000 feet.
Yeah.
Ryan.
And that was a little scary because that was technical climbing. You had to have crampons, the spikes on your boots. I had to have that brace around your waist and under your legs with what's called an ascending Jumar, where you go up a fixed line. And that was probably, I like doing races and triathlons. And when you cross the finish line, everything leads to that moment. And then you go to the recovery tent, you maybe go have a beer with your buddies, and you're done, right? Yeah. The thing with climbing a mountain is everything is going to the top. But once you get to the top, then you got to come back down.
Yeah.
And anyways, I had a great time with my friends. Through marriage, it was a cool family experience. And we did Bhutan on that trip too. And it was a great trip. It was masochistic, all as always.
I mean, that's like a life goal for so many people, and you've done that. I mean, you've also, too, a life goal, which I would love to do, is you've done an Ironman.
I did an Ironman, yep. Well, I kind of give the analogy that it's kind of like getting I don't have any tattoos, but I have friends. They're like, you get one tattoo, then you want the second one, then you want to, connect it on your arm and whatever. And my buddy that I was co-captain and one of my best friends and my lifting partner in college tore his ACL playing lacrosse. And I swam club in college. And for rehab, he asked me to start doing spin class with him. And then with lacrosse, we were running our tails off all the time. And so I was like, man, I'm basically training for a triathlon. Like, why don't I sign up for a mini? So my senior year, I did a mini. And I give that tattoo analogy because after I did a mini, I was like, I want to do like an international distance. That was fun.
Full one, yeah.
A full one. And then from there, I started getting more and more into the triathlon circuit. And I was like, maybe I want to do an Ironman. And I hired a coach. I trained for 30 hours a week for 6 months. My coach had me go plant-based during training, no drinking, very strict. It was a part-time job.
Yeah, no.
It was a part-time job.
I mean, people that have done it, it is. It's a job.
So I did the half Miami as a tune-up, like 30, 40 days out. And then I did Cozumel full. It was one of the most beautiful races I've ever done. It almost broke me. I had something called hyponatremia at the end, which is a fancy word for being dehydrated. But it's being dehydrated by overhydrating and not having enough electrolytes.
Wow.
And I'm always banged up after a race, whether it's a 5K or a marathon, because you just push yourself. I mean, as hard as you can.
You just did the New York City marathon.
Yeah, I just did the New York City one, and the Ironman. It broke me.
So would you say, you've done these amazing physical challenges. Would you say the Ironman is the most difficult, or which one would you say is the hardest one that you've done?
I would say the Ironman's the most difficult. I think the most scary that I've done is I did a Grand Canyon run with a bunch of buddies.
Yeah, I did that with Nick.
I did it with Nick and some other guys. I organized it. It wasn't organized by anyone else. And we did what's called rim to rim to rim.
Yeah.
Which is an ultra run, basically. And, you walk and trek on some of the steep or loose gravel parts, and on the flats you run. We left camp at 2:30 in the morning. It was a 5K from our campground just to the start of the Grand Canyon. So we went North Rim, I guess if memory serves, 20-some miles. I think all told it was about 60 miles. And I would say we knew there was a system coming in, and because it's high elevation.
Yeah.
So we were going to spend a night to acclimate, but because we knew this big system was coming in, we decided to go the first night. So we didn't have a chance to really acclimate as much as we wanted, but we wanted to beat the storm. And we almost beat the storm. The storm came in when we probably had 2 hours left, and we were ascending back up.
I heard this story from Nick, but it's...
Oh, my gosh. It was freezing rain. Freezing rain. We found a isolated little shack bathroom on the way, and it was like a big one because it was connected to another campground. We dumped trash out of the trash cans and put the garbage bags on us as ponchos because we were starting to get soaking wet, which is going to be a problem. Temperature dropped to probably 40 degrees. And as we ascended and got closer to the top, and I'm telling you, with no pride, every step was hard.
Yeah.
Every step was hard. Freezing. I was like, oh, just one more step. Just one more step.
David Goggins in it.
Yeah. And then it became driving snow.
Thanks, Ryan.
And my buddy had an extra goo packet. And he's like, hey, man, he knew I was struggling. He's like, hey, man, hit this. And it was like the last little boost. It gave me like a little bit more wind in my sails. My sugar must have been real low. And I got up, and then I didn't want to go another 5K to the campground. So as embarrassing it is to admit, we had to sleep in these bathrooms that had heaters like right at the top just to wait for the sun to come up to whatever. Yeah, that was brutal. But, I'll say this lesson even for me. My friends, at different points, I almost had somewhat mutiny, right? In the sense they're like, Beckett, how the hell did you talk us into this? This is arguably the worst thing I've ever done in my life. This is just dumb. This is just dumb. And I will tell you that within minutes to an hour of us finishing, and we got back to the lodge and we're hanging out, we had, I think, 6 guys in total. Every single one of them, like, man, that was one of the coolest things I've ever done. So glad I did it, And that's kind of like how I give an analysis on training for something, even education. In education, I'm in mile 24 of a 26-mile marathon where your whole body's telling you to stop. Your brain's asking you why you're doing this to yourself. But as soon as you cross the finish line, as soon as you graduate, as soon as you ring the bell for that goal, at least in my experience with my friends, like, it's all worth it. And you're really happy you did.
It's where you grow. I mean, what great lessons you're sharing with the listeners and the watchers here, Ryan. I mean,
I try to learn from my mistakes. But what I think is good, like not to belabor the point, is just taking yourself out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to live a life where I was comfortable, because I think as far as we know, we're on this world one time.
Yeah.
If we find out something different, that's fine. That's great. But we have one time on this merry-go-round. And I don't want to just work 9 to 5 I'm not passionate about, not have experiences, there's another saying, there's the old cliche that every problem has a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you flip that around, every solution had a problem.
Wow.
Right? So you can't have a solution if you didn't have a problem. And I think that some people think that they want perfect, and I think it's great to try to aspire to that as a North Star, but perfect is boring, in my opinion. And people feel the most fulfilled, at least I do, and my friends I feel the same. The harder it is, the more rewarding it is.
Yeah.
Whether it's education or a physical thing or a business thing. So I usually run to something that I know is going to take me out of my comfort zone. So long as I'm not going to die or lose a finger.
I mean, it is. I mean, starting your own business. I mean, that's an incredible accomplishment for anybody, and you've done it successfully, Ryan. I mean, all these physical, achievements that you've made and done, and you've continued to grow. And I don't see you slow down. I mean, let's talk about Ryan here in the future. Where do you see yourself here in the next let's say, the next 5 years?
Yeah. So I like I said, the recession, running my own business, all of these things, it's one of those things. The more you learn or understand how much you don't know, right? And I'm always trying to get better. There's so many things that I would like to do and make BitRealty better, and myself better as a result. What I would like to do going forward is finish this degree, right?
Yeah.
That will be great. That will increase my bandwidth. I'd love to see Real Trade go. That would be a huge win for me, for us, for Real Trade, and that would make me feel really good. And then BitRealty. BitRealty is not something I think I want to do for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I think I want to reach the top of the proverbial mountain and still play a part. But I think I will be the most excited, believe it or not, when I replace myself with BitRealty and
have an exit. Yeah.
Have an exit. And I wouldn't, death grip it, and I would try, and I've been telling you off the podcast, I've been looking at franchising the company. Mm-hmm. There's pros and cons to franchising, to be sure. But one of the things I like about franchising is you're giving multiple people the opportunity to be their own business owners. Because I looked at opening a company in Ocala, and in that scenario, I was considering being business partners with the people there. Because it's 3 hours away from where I am. And I would be part of the operating agreement. I would be an owner of the LLC. I would have to have, voting rights and decisions on minutia to some degree and whatever. And then when I started looking into the franchise model and assessing the pros and the cons, I was like, man, that's great, because those people I was considering going into business with, it's their business.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm helping them, which is really what I like when I help someone. When we were talking about getting you in the pool and maybe getting you involved in triathlons. Mm-hmm. Talking to a friend about helping them open their Coinbase account and getting their first $10 purchase of Bitcoin. Helping a girlfriend of mine that I've known forever that wants to lose 10 pounds. Helping a new agent start to figure out their business model and how they want to approach it. I love that stuff.
No, it is. I can tell just too on your personality. I mean, your big why. I mean, you care for your agents. You're there for them almost to a fault. Just a lot of hand holding. I mean, as a new agent out there, right? If you're out there, what would you give your biggest tip that you would give for them if they're looking for a broker?
For real estate in general, or for what they want to find in a broker?
Yeah, what they want to find in a broker. What would you say?
So the answer is the annoying one, is that it depends. And this is why. We have a saying in the horse world, a different horse for a different course. And certain horses are better for racing. Mm-hmm. Certain horses and certain breeds are better for jumping, and some are better for polo, for example. And what I mean by that as it relates to finding a broker is it has to be a good fit. And it has to be a good fit based on what you want to do. Because a lot of, especially in the beginning of BitRealty, a lot of the agents that asked to be a part of BitRealty, they were looking for something that was relatively laissez-faire, hands-off, in that they were very seasoned. They didn't need hand-holding.
Yep.
They were just tired of all the fluff and all the BS and the brokerage being in their pocket, nickel and diming their clients, tech fees, desk fees, having to buy this magazine that inevitably ended up in the dumpster, all kinds of being competed with against the broker that also was doing real estate in the same market. Happened a lot. And it was very easy. And I said, listen, we'll make this deal, and I'm here if you need me, and we'll continue to grow, and easy peasy. So at the time of BitRealty, that was a good fit for those agents.
Yeah.
And it worked for them. As I've started to grow, I've started to take on some more agents that need a little bit more work because I'm fulfilled by that.
Yeah.
I want to be careful with my bandwidth. So I would say 5 years ago, I wasn't the right broker for those people. But as I have moved forward, I think that at this point, I am the right broker for them for different reasons with each one. So I would say you have to kind of have your end in sight before you decide what kind of broker you want to be. And I was big on training programs. And I told you the story with Don Langdon, my mentor. And that was really important to me because I considered working for Pulte DeVosta because they had a JD Power and Associates like training program, and it was very corporate. And my existing situation at Palm Beach Polo was very localized, very niche, very entrepreneurial. And I made a decision then that broker, Don, was the best person for me. I could have made a decision that the broker at the new development company with Pulte DeVosta was the better one for me, but I wanted to learn, and I was hungry to learn.
Well, it sounds like too that Don Langdon had a personality, right? That was there for you. He cared about you, right?
Oh, yeah.
That was part of his why, and I've actually seen that spill over for you, Ryan.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It is. You know, you care about your agents, you care about their success, and you're there to help them. And because people don't realize a broker, their customer is who?
Is the agent.
It's the agent.
Yeah.
It's not buyers or sellers, you know?
Yeah, and I've been trying to figure out a way to work that in more into my practice and into my market messaging because, you know, by definition in business school, your customer is who pays you. Seller and buyer as the broker isn't the one paying me. It's the agent that I have my agreement with, right? And you know, I was part of a couple different brands, and I have friends, obviously, in a lot of different brands, and it just doesn't seem like a lot of brokerages, including the big successful ones, seem to have that mentality, attitude, marketing message, and sure, second level, sellers and buyers, like, if they're not happy, my agent's not going to be happy.
Of course.
So, but my first priority is the agent. So as I'm working on business strategy and modeling going forward, that's kind of my North Star. How can I make the customer happy? Where's the industry going? What kind of business model can I make that doesn't just last for the next 2 to 5 years, but what has endurance? You know,
you're applying yourself. I mean, you went through the accelerator here.
Went through the accelerator,
in
yeah.
1909. You're continuing. It's a good thread throughout your life here, Ryan. Is continuing pushing yourself, getting out of your comfort zone, continuing learning new things, and that's why you've been a success. And I think you're going to continue to be.
I'll drop another little nugget that I use. So I learned in I think I was studying Toyota. I was studying Japanese business culture, and they have some very interesting things that they do. And one of the things that I picked up is a lot of their business philosophy is a word, I probably won't pronounce it correctly. It's called Kaizen.
Kaizen, yes, I've heard that word.
I think it's Kaizen. And that one little word, just the first time I heard it, I think it must have been an undergrad, it's like, I love that word. And what Kaizen means is continuous improvement. So when these boards get together at Toyota, that's like kind of like the underlying thread of their meeting. Like, how can we always get better? How can we always get better? You know, how can I be a better friend? How can I be a better boyfriend, eventual husband, a parent, a business leader? All of that stuff there's always room to get better. And I find it fun to get better, you know, whether I'm making my boat better today or, you know, I make myself better.
So what would you say, like, is it a mindset? Is it something that, you know, that you feel in your mind what was it? Was there a certain trigger in your life that you saw that? Like, what was it?
Oh, that's a great question. I could probably work that out with my therapist.
Okay.
You know, I think I've always been that way. I think that if I really, and I haven't really thought about it, so it's a great question.
Maybe it came from sports because you were in sports, so
sports definitely was a huge part of that.
Okay.
I think the other thing is that, you know, I found it interesting. So my brother and I are 3.5 years apart. He's younger, and he was always super skinny, and he could crush Wendy's after school growing up or whatever. I always had a body type where I could be skinny or I could be chubby. I always had to be careful on what I ate, right? And it was a double-edged sword. And even to this day, like I can put on a lot of muscle. I can get skinny. I can get dad bod. I can get like it just depends what I decide to put in my mouth and how I decide to exercise. And what I saw is our parents let us buy 2 magazines at the airport before we took a flight. And my brother would buy, you know, sports magazines, and I bought Men's Health and Men's Fitness. I was young. This is middle school. And I would read the articles on nutrition and supplements because I had to, right?
Yeah.
Like I was just starting to get interested in girls at the time. And I was like, and I was swimming on swim team and, girls and family would come watch me. And I was like, man, so I started to become a little insecure. And I was like, man, I got to make sure that I improve myself.
Build your body. Like,
Yeah.
what are the steps that you need to do that?
In terms of like eating right.
Yeah.
So what I found is starchy carbs are bad for me, right? So if I get my carbs from fruit and vegetables, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
But I just have to be disciplined. I like salty and crunchy. That's my vice. But the point of all that is I had to learn.
It gave you the mindset.
And I don't think my brother would mind saying this, but after we got out of college, he struggled more with it because he never had to learn, right? So when his metabolism started slowing down and he wasn't playing organized sports like we did growing up, he then later in life, which is a little harder, it's like learning a language or an instrument when you're older or younger. I had already figured out, don't eat that, eat this, or whatever. And my brother after college, he figured it out. But he had a little bit there. He's like, I never had to do this, So I think maybe that was also, in addition to sports, a thread on me having to watch my weight and figure out how to stay in good physical condition.
Well, it's great. And served you well. And you've shared this knowledge now with the listeners.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I love doing it. I've told some of our friends, including Nick, that, my end goal would be like there's an angel investor that Nick from the AI podcast we had. He asked me a great question. And maybe I've told you the story. We were jogging one day. We call it office hours.
Yeah.
Right? Where we talk. And he goes, well, Ryan, what would you want to do if you had $5 million in the bank? And I don't remember the exact number, but I feel like a lot of times I had been asked that question. Usually I'm asked that question if you had Jeff Bezos money. Or if you had Elon Musk money.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting about Nick's question is it was significant in terms of financial freedom, but it was low enough where you have to be very intentional and resourceful how you do it. And I was like, man, I'd love to be like your angel investor, Jeff. I wouldn't fund a whole company or anything like that, but if I could identify entrepreneurs and be able to help them avoid some landmines on some things that I learned.
That we've learned.
Yeah, exactly. And I could give them, a little money early stage, with the knowledge I may lose it or it might go great. I would love that. And, I'm trying to, in my business model, BitRealty thing, like, how can I help my agents financially, physically, mentally, and all around, because I could have an agent, and I've experienced this, that's making a ton of money. Their business as it relates to real estate, BitRealty is great, but something with a mental health issue because of what they're going through in their relationship, their financial fitness on paying their taxes quarterly, I could go all down the line. They're not happy.
Yeah.
And, if I have an agent that's making a ton of money, that's great. But if they're hanging by a thread in their mental well-being, that doesn't serve anyone well.
Yeah.
So you need like the full thing. So,
that's amazing, Ryan. You're one of the few brokers that I've actually know that even
thinks of that.
Thinks of that.
Yeah. Well, I love puns to a fault. So I call it the holistic approach. And instead of an H, like it's properly spelled, I spell it with a W because it's not based on the whole person, the whole agent. And when you brought up Don, you said he really cared. One of the things that maybe I got from him is that he would help me out with investing, like paying quarterly and contributing to my SEP IRA and setting up a PA so I could double my retirement contributions and relationship advice and, spend a week as I wrestled with what car I was going to buy because one got better gas mileage and one had a lower interest rate on the auto loan when I was 25. I appreciated all of that stuff a lot and still do to this day. And, if you don't do that, and this is just my opinion, what are we doing here?
I know.
What are we doing here? I don't want to be around people that are unhappy, and unhappy people don't want to be unhappy. So I love to figure out a way. And my mom says this, I'm also a fixer. which is probably why I'm doing the sailboat. But I love trying to find things that have room for improvement, and then just like, maybe we should get into flipping houses.
Right? No, I mean, it is. I mean, I mean, that's a great attribute and a mark of a leader is they want to make the world a better place. They want to raise the people above them, right?
Yeah.
And bring them up. So, which is great, which is a great ending point, I think, for this podcast, Ryan. You've shared so much great information. I hope the listeners have got a lot of this. It's been an honor, Ryan, having you on the podcast.
That was
I've
fantastic.
learned so much just myself on this.
Well, it was fantastic. I appreciate the questions that you spent a lot of time working on, because I haven't thought about some of this stuff in a while, and it's good. I mean, maybe this is part of the continuous improvement, but some of your questions have really got my brain thinking, and not a lot of people ask me this kind of stuff. So I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate the questions.
It's good, and the listeners get to know who the hosts are now.
Yeah.
So we're excited about this. So thanks for tuning in to the REDA Podcast. Remember, smash that like button, follow us. You can email us at the REDA Podcast if you want to be on the podcast. So thanks for tuning in.
Let's get it. Let's get it. Let's get it.